Hi everyone. I'm just about to get started. I'm just going to look for my look for Nicole, who's joining me today. Okay, hi everyone. Oh, there she is. Okay, I'm just gonna do this off the bat before we. Okay, and I'm just gonna do one other thing before I get started with some formalities. If we get Nicole, can I? Hi Nicole.
Hi.
I'm just gonna pin our comment here of what we're doing and who we are. 1 second. So we're at Houseblend Live, hashtag, and then this is me when I'm not using the Instagram of the National Gallery. I think you're about to hear my small dog who doesn't like bikes at the window, so I will apologize in advance if that happens. Oops.
I've got some lawnmowers going in the background here.
This is live, yeah, Instagram Live, there we are. And I'm just gonna do one last hashtag of your NGC. So once I've done this, I'll post it and I will pin it. Whoops. Sorry.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. Okay, there we are. So now I can put that down. Thanks, everyone. And welcome, everybody. I can see there's quite a number of people joining. That's super. So hi, everyone. Welcome to NGC Houseblend Live, a new initiative by the Gallery. I'm Jonathan Shaughnessy, Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the National Gallery of Canada. And today we're starting this new initiative, a weekly series on Instagram Live, Thursdays at 3 p.m., 13h en français, les mêmes personnes. So it's a weekly series in French and English, featuring NGC curators and invited guests, just in time for your afternoon coffee break. So here we are at 3 o'clock. And so please join us. Many have already joined. And to start things off, I'm here this week with Nicole Burisch, Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art, who's joining us in virtual space, but is in Ottawa, and joining us here on unceded Algonquin territory. And I think as we're all living in virtual environments and sort of communicating a little bit off the land, I think it's important to have a reminder of the land. And in Canada, as always, it's important to acknowledge the land and give thanks to its keepers since time immemorial on Turtle Island. So with that, welcome, Nicole.
Hi, thank
How
you.
are you?
Welcome, Jonathan. I'm good. How about you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. And a housekeeping note that just because I know with Instagram Live and these formats, we're going to be speaking for about 20 to 30 minutes so that people have a sense of it if you would like to stay for the whole thing. And we'll see where we get to with questions towards the end and keeping up with comments. But just towards the end, if you have questions, maybe start to bring them to us. We decided we would begin this initiative, and really Houseblend Live, just because it is the first one, is a sense where we're all working remotely. The gallery, everybody went home to work remotely when things started. And so this is an initiative really to try to bring some of the faces behind the gallery and so that the public get to know us a little bit better. And over the course of the weeks to come, it'll not only be curators, but it'll be curators speaking with some of our colleagues. So next week, Geneviève Saunier will be speaking with you, Nicole. She's our conservator, of contemporary art. And they're going to have a lively conversation about where contemporary goes when it goes into the conservation area. So there's that. And we're starting with Nicole. We're both curators.
This is true.
And we know that over the past, decade, few years at least, one can curate lots of things. One can curate a wardrobe. I think we can curate books on a shelf. You can curate your music selection. For good or for ill, a lot of debates over curating as a verb. That's not what we're here to talk about, but we have decided, what David Balzer has called curation and, brought it to the broader attention. But we thought we would start with what mugs we've chosen to curate for these events. So Nicole, what mug have you selected for your afternoon coffee or whatever you're drinking?
Well, today I am drinking tea, some calming tea in the afternoon, and I'm drinking it out of a mug by an artist from British Columbia, Ora Carney, and it came to me through a trade during my undergrad. I did ceramics, so we were in the program together, and yeah.
Nice. And you have I think that I know you, I think you have a collection of ceramic mugs by Canadian artists.
Yes, they don't have a large collection of art, but I do have a lot of handmade ceramic things. Yeah. And how about you? What are you
right. Yes.
Today?
So I've selected my sculpture project Munster mug. So not a, it's a mug that was available whenever in the before time, as we're now calling it, when travel, which is of importance to so many of us curators, to get out there and see shows and meet artists and that sort of thing and know what's happening. I do like to buy coffee mugs from museums and places that I visit, and I thought maybe the sculpture project every 10 years in Munster, Germany, where there is this exhibition. This was from 2017, the last one, and I thought what an appropriate maybe model right now, as we're all thinking about how limited we are to institutions and the outside, but Sculpture Project Munster is, of course, entirely set around biking and walking to see public sculpture projects every 10 years. So that's one I selected for today. So Nicole, I think, as I said, in getting to know one another, well, not us, but for the public, you've been at the gallery for 2 to 3 years, I think, now, an esteemed colleague. But we've realized that we've known each other for over 10 years. I think we first met when you were director of MST Festival in Calgary, Mountain Standard Time. I was in Calgary, well, I mean, we traveled, but at that time I was visiting Alberta, and you reminded me, I think I was on my way to Lethbridge to see the David Hoffus exhibition that came to the National Gallery, but was organized by the Southern Alberta Art Gallery. And so I wanted to meet you then and understand what you were doing. And I think it sort of speaks, you come to the gallery, the National Gallery, with a career in artist-run center, artist-run culture, performance, as you were doing then. And I'd just be curious to start out the conversation with asking you how you got to the gallery and what maybe you notice in terms of the shifts from going from, one world, in a sense, if we call the artist-run world, one world, to an institutional center like the National Gallery. Maybe that's where we could start, Nicole.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did sort of start my career and still maintain quite a strong connection to artist-run centers and artist-run culture, both with Mountain Standard Time, like you mentioned, and also with Centre des Arts Actuels Scole in Montreal, and on the board for Viva, the performance festival there too. And yeah, it was a bit of a transition coming to work at the gallery and to come to work at such a large institution, and sort of, and the ways of working and the differences in those kinds of organizations have been really interesting to kind of keep thinking about. In artist-run centers, it's often we're working with very small teams of people, so sort of 2 or 3 people, and you kind of do everything. Like you hang the show, and you mop the floor, and you rearrange the furniture, and you sit the gallery on weekends. So it's sort of doing all the things all the time. And so a big transition for me was coming to work in an institution where we work with all of these kinds of teams of highly specialized and like incredibly talented people to help us do things, install the shows. And like you said, we work with conservators, a publication department that helps us with the labels and text. So the kind of complexity of working through those systems has been really different for me, but also really exciting. Like I'm always learning so much in that. And the other big thing for me is working with a collection, which most artist-run centers, that model does not usually involve collecting art. But what we have is this sort of incredible collection with this fantastic long history. So there's these objects that we have to take care of in ways that I think I hadn't ever thought of before either, like works that can't be exposed to light for too long and can only be up for 6 months at a time, things like that. And also sort of thinking about collections in terms of legacies of past curators. We were talking about this a bit earlier too, and sort of recognizing that the collection holds all these sort of masterpieces and amazing works, but that it's been very much shaped by previous voices and previous curators. So we brought up earlier the example of the Donald Judd show that's up at MoMA right now, that features a kind of impressive number of works from the National Gallery of Canada's collection, and that's because Bryden Smith was collecting those works at the time, and there was someone with a particular interest in Judd's work, and that's sort of reflected in the holdings that we have now.
Yeah, and all that to say that with Judd, on one of the future episodes planned for Houseblend Live, will be with Annie Thomas and Adam Welch, talking about that exhibition and the legacy of Anne, of course, is Bryden's partner. So there's lots of stories that she will share with us. And I think we had also spoken about some of the legacies of curators and exhibitions that have influenced us in some ways. Nicole, you and I share an exhibition like Crossings by Diana Nemiroff, that kind of a show that I think needs to from 1998, that really is about looking at global and diasporic connections within the art world and artists, that was really in dialogue then and super important now. And I think we reflect on those, and it's seen in some aspects of the collection as well.
Yeah, and to think through about ideas that kind of come up and cycle back and become relevant again, or were always relevant but sort of re-emerge, and materials too. We've been thinking a lot about that.
Actually, that brings in, we had kind of scripted a bit of a dialogue here, but actually there's a few things that have come up right away. But one of the things, I want to get to talking about space, the fact that we're not working at the gallery, but if we think about some of what we've seen at the gallery over the last few years, when the contemporary and historical spaces were reconfigured for 2017, and there was a chronological display right through contemporary art, which we rarely do in the contemporary galleries, there were works from the 80s and 90s, and it sort of spoke to what you were saying. Some installations by Lynn Lapointe and Martha Fleming that probably those were acquired in the 90s, so they're no longer contemporary, because of course contemporary art at the National Gallery, our department, is 25 years, so we're always losing works to another collection, our colleagues in modern Canadian art. And so I think for me, seeing some of these works, which were, we won't go into big descriptions, but were really creating, there were some of the first installation works working with non-traditional spaces in the 90s. And these works spoke so loudly once we revisited them in the contemporary galleries 25 years later,
Yeah, that particular work was a real sort of discovery for me, which, I think I knew those artists, but kind of seeing that work in context now, and sort of looking at what contemporary artists are doing with similar subjects and materials around feminist art, around relationship to nature, to literature, like that work to me really, like you were saying, it sort of sang today in a different way. That was really exciting.
It speaks to, I think, how collections, the importance of how collections are built and what we can do with them, and how and thinking about the future as well. But if we do go to our jour à jour, our day-to-day that we no longer have, I mean, we have a different day-to-day, and I think, speaking for myself, there's, and maybe this is people watching might relate or not, depending on what your situation is, or whether you're in a workplace that all of a sudden everybody's working remotely. We communicate a lot, I find, through the Zoom environment, and through, we have sort of no choice now, but there are certainly, we aren't in the building. And so I just think that it would be interesting to know for you, Nicole, what do you miss most about not being there? Are there works of art? Are there spaces? I mean, what is it that you might miss about physically actually being at the gallery?
Yeah. I mean, I do. It's something I do really miss being in there. I mean, often whenever I can, I try to come in, when I arrive at work, I try to come in through the front entrance, so I can do that sort of walk up the colonnade and through a bit of the spaces before heading into...
Under the Jordan Bennett.
That's right. Yeah. And right now, I mean, there's such amazing works up to go see past the Waranengo and Jordan Bennett and the Masaapo work, the collective from New Zealand, the sort of woven turquoise work. I'm sure lots of people have seen that. That just, yeah, like these sort of welcoming, those works are all part of Abadakwane, continuous fire for Continued. And so I miss seeing those. And I also miss, there's a work that we had installed in the contemporary galleries by Taryn Simon called Paperwork in the Will of Capital. I think that, yeah, Paperwork in the Will of Capital. And it's a sculpture, and on top of it is sitting a folio of a herbarium. So it's paper that has plants and botanical samples pinned to it. And the really cool thing about that work is when you display it open, with the book, you can turn the pages successively over time. And so we had organized this whole schedule for how we were going to turn the pages every 6 weeks. I had a little alert in my calendar. And we sort of done a selection of pages that we were gonna show during the run of that work being up. And now the pages are sitting there, you know, frozen and empty where we had left them. So I'm a bit sad about not getting to kind of see that through. I mean, I'm sure we'll put the work up again, but yeah, I'm missing that opportunity to have, you know, this very subtle, but also quite personal relationship to that particular artwork. How about you? You missing anything?
Well, it's interesting because I've been thinking about that room. You know, I was going to say too, for any, you know, the one thing is the works themselves are very well taken care of right now. They're in the dark and they're sitting there. So, you know, away from a conservation perspective right now, but you know, the works are in good shape as they sit idle, which is something I've been thinking about a lot actually, in terms of how exhibitions that nobody sees, you know, but that's something we can get into. But yeah, in terms of the practice, I've been thinking about that room for those who maybe haven't seen or aren't in Ottawa, but it's kind of a right when you walk into the upper floors of the contemporary galleries, there's a number of works, Terrence Simon, Vicky Alexander, some photographs, and that room was really, we worked on it and thinking about the global and flows of capitalism and capital, but really through nature and flowers, and you know, in some ways also entities that are traded, but also have their way of circulating also on their own when we think of flora and fauna as they get brought to a place and then they circulate. And so it's a room I've been thinking about a lot, of course, right now, where the art world in the before time, and we'll see where it goes after, if we're using that terminology, is really a place that I think we took for granted. And I mean, we just in terms of the international art world and those that, you know, think about the way that we contextualize work through biennials, through a kind of, and of course, the National Gallery very involved with the Venice Biennial. And so these flows of transnational circuits, and, you know, that comes screeching to a halt when the only thing that actually is truly seems to be able to be transnational with no problem is a virus that shut everything down. And so I think a lot about that room and where we're at. And there's one particular work in there by Michael Armitage, a Kenyan-born painter based in London. And it's a work that I feel quite special. It's special to the collection, or at least to me, that a collector in Miami gave to the gallery after a conversation we had about the work a few years ago. And it was a work we shared an interest in. So you couldn't ask for more as a curator, that you're with someone and then he says, well, I think the museum should have it. And anyways, it's a bench in a park in Kenya, and a couple that are kissing, and it's on Labugo bark. So Michael Armitage paints on a particular tree, very important in Uganda. He figured out how to turn it into a canvas, and he paints on this. And so it's this kind of intimate moment. There's a whole backstory to this couple on a bench that were actually filmed by the authorities because they were meeting late at night, and there was certain persecution going on. And but I've been thinking about that work a lot as well when we're, you know, hearing about fines for sitting on a park bench and having to think very, very carefully about how we circulate through public space right now. So yeah, but I was thinking, Nicole, because, you know, one other thing, getting away from a little bit of the collection. Oh, and Ron Terada's work,
You have left the American sector,
which there's an article so everybody can look it up on the NGC magazine, which came out. But there's a work about borders, thinking about Checkpoint Charlie, and at that point, the relationship between the United States and the world. And then it was a work that was made in Canada and Windsor at a certain point over a decade ago. And now, you know, just these works that kind of resonate. And I think that can sometimes be the that sort of makes it really great, I think, work of art where it adapts to different kinds of contexts, and all of a sudden you can see it anew. And anyways, that's something that I think I've been missing. But all that to say, Nicole, as curators, I mean, we work, especially at the gallery, with physical, like the art object. So it's a material object in physical space, the space of the gallery, to create experiences with viewers through context and through bringing works into dialogue. And I wonder how you see that job right now as you sort of are at home with dealing with virtual environments.
Yeah, I mean, thinking a lot about, like these ideas of space and objects and how we're conceiving of them now are very much in my mind. I'm sure like you, like I'm spending a lot of time online checking out online programming and virtual book clubs and conferences and studio visits. So I think a thing that's really coming to light for me right now is the way that we're thinking about online space. And it's not, you know, like your website is not just a platform to tell people what's going on at your gallery anymore. It's actually a space that can be programmed and a space for art. So I think we're at the beginning of seeing sort of changes that'll happen in that sphere, and you know, whether that's through virtual tours or commissions or all kinds of different ways that we can now, like we can conceive of the internet as a space to show art. And I mean, that's not a new idea, but I think we're in the midst of kind of revisiting and rethinking that. And I've also been thinking a lot about well, you know, we've been talking a lot about domestic space and the fact that, you know, I'm sort of existing right now in these the smaller space of my house, of my little home office, and of thinking about objects in space. And, you know, when you're talking about curating, it's this sort of often this a work of thinking about putting objects in dialogue with each other too, and in dialogue with space and in dialogue with the public. But yeah, I'm in this house now sort of surrounded by domestic objects and surrounded by my objects. And so the way that I'm thinking about those and their materials and how I relate to them in this really sort of more continuous daily rituals and daily ways has been really, that's been something I've been thinking about a lot. And I assume most people are sort of living that right now as well, those of us who are, you know, fortunate enough to be sheltering in comfortable homes. So
I think that also I've been thinking, because as you say, I mean, you know, artists even working in virtual environments or I should say digital, I suppose, online, you know, this isn't necessarily new. It's something that was and certainly the idea too of attending a conference on Zoom as opposed to being there was something that was a possibility, or Skyping in as a presenter. You know, so I think we're reminded that these technologies and the way that artists were in dialogue have been there for some time, but this forces a kind of, I see it as almost forcing a sort of, not a collision, but, you know, it's sort of saying, okay, now we're forced to confront the fact that there are these other experiential ways to think about the way we're going to be receiving art object and thinking about those relationships, and it's going to now without fault overlap with our experience returning to physical space. And I think that this is something, and that experience of the art object, and I think that how those two things start to carry on from here on in, you know, assuming that things won't be normal for a little while, even if we do have the chance to go back sooner or whenever. That's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, you know, and the way that artists will also adapt with that.
With that in mind, we're getting close to
oh my goodness.
Time flies when you're having coffee. So we do have a question from the audience and a couple comments. From Jamie Morris, who says that she missed seeing us walk through the gallery, and we certainly miss you too. And we have a question from Monique Quayle too. I'll read that out for us now. She asks, what new contemporary art might we see come out of this time as artists are also isolated? do you think we'll see new works with themes related to this time period? Do you want to start that one?
Well, I think, yeah, thanks, Monique. I think it's inevitable, right? I mean, but I do think that it's a tricky moment. I mean, art, insofar as, there are practices, Nicole, I mean, you can chime in, but I mean, there are practices that are on purpose, not necessarily related in the day-to-day of the world, right? So that there's plenty of artists whose work is on a trajectory that is not necessarily, I mean, the studio is the studio, and if they're lucky enough to be going in there, then this is maybe a moment of pause to reflect on what they're doing. But I think, but I can't speak for any artist, but I know that I think the pressures I feel too is how much do you want to directly work about or speak about this moment, as opposed to take the time to reflect on how it might impact upon what you do anyways. Whereas there are probably artists where it will be a very direct response, depending on the nature of their work. I mean,
sure.
Sorry?
Our colleague Alex Nawigabo shared with us this morning an amazing link of Indigenous artists who are doing beaded masks that were absolutely extraordinary. So the ways that people are even creating things right now in the moment, a direct response to what's happening, I think is something
yes,
we're already seeing.
We're seeing,
but I think we'll also see other responses, and perhaps not directly thematic responses, but also ones that are in relation to sort of where we've been spending time, how we've been spending time. Those feelings of disconnection or confusion or anxiety, like I think those will be emotions that we might see reflected too.
And Nicole, do you think? I mean, I think that it could also take some time. I mean, I think that's there's been a lot. I mean, we're not making this up, but a lot of sort of, when you think of those kind of planetary or world moments where there's been a lot of writing about the years between 9/11, which which affected certainly the West in a certain way, and North America, and now, and then so I think that but even with that period, I think it took a little while to trickle in the reaction and the response to how you're processing these kinds of major things. So we'll see, and it will be our job to also reflect on that, definitely, as curators.
If anyone else has questions too, you're welcome to, or comments, you're welcome to post those in the little comment box there if you want.
Did we have any others right now? No.
We have a lot of hellos.
That's nice.
I think Monique is the only one that submitted the oh, thanks. Monique says thanks. You're welcome.
But Nicole, if there isn't for now, because it would be nice to, I mean, we can, I just was going to ask you, because I have another question for you, which is, I think, speaking about contemporary art and contemporary art curators, I mean, to a certain extent, contemporary art is such a vast field. It's a diverse field. It can often be a very vexing field, I think, for many members of our public, and, those who come to the gallery, because it's just so, there's so much potential for anything to be art under contemporary and put into certain frames. But you have a very specific, I mean, you have a research base in a certain area of, among other things, but of really looking at histories of craft in relation to fine art and art practices. And that's been a sustained interest, I think, for you. And I know you're editing a book right now. And so I wonder if there's, just if you could speak a little bit about that, or if there are any exhibitions or things that have really influenced your own thinking along the way in those areas.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I said, I did my undergrad in ceramics, and so the realization through those studies that there were these really sort of intense distinctions between works made out of certain materials, like clay or textiles or jewelry, that were considered craft, and then other forms of practice like painting and sculpture, installation, that were art, and that those divisions, those distinctions, were really interesting to me, and sort of interrogating how those came about, how those function, has been a kind of long-standing question and area of interest in my practice. And I think thinking too, you know, some of those divisions come, like I said, out of certain materials, but also sort of come out of who was making those things. So often work made by women or made by Indigenous artists that get sort of excluded from the fine art canon, and because it's dismissed as craft. But a lot of where I come from too is sort of about valuing what craft has to say and what craft speaks to, and what it can represent. So as you know, there's lots of contemporary artists now working with so-called craft materials. So we've been seeing a lot of weaving, and recently have acquired some works that are woven as well, and thinking a lot about that also that sort of extended history of tapestry and textiles in Canada. Yeah, so and sort of asking that question about what are those materials and what are those techniques being called on to represent? What do they stand in for? Yeah, so that's it's an area that I think is still interesting, and you know, and again, we see everyone's making masks right now. Lots of people are doing masks, so there's
yeah, that's been a viral thing, I think, posting the templates you're making. Actually, my masks that I've got early on were from one of my mother's oldest friends, who I realized who is a seamstress in her life work, and so I called her up, and sure enough, she was already making them. So there we are. But, on that, I also will do a little prompt for. I think we're doing also on Instagram. On both channels, Curators Pick, and I think Luann Martineau, you're going to write something about a work of hers coming up that sort of speaks to artists working within these tensions. We do have a question, Nicole, from Janet's Art 1955. Are you all working with American artists too? Yes, we should say, just for those that may be less familiar with the National Gallery of Canada and its collection criterias, there is a focus on art made in Canada, strong focus on contemporary art made in Canada, and also, of course, Indigenous art, but it's within a global and international context, and that's been a long-standing. Well, since actually the curator we mentioned, Bryden Smith, and looking at American art as a big part of that. So yeah, it's a part of the collection. In fact,
and international.
And internationally. So, I mean, that's what I mean. It's always, and I think as curators looking out into the art world, it's thinking about what's happening in Canada, but with an eye towards placing that within both a national and international context, and that's very important. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, good question. Well, that takes us to about 3:30. We're already over time.
Wow.
Lots to talk about.
Okay.
We'll keep going. Like Jonathan said, we'll be back here next week, again at 1 o'clock in French, and then
Nicole.
at 3 o'clock in English. Oh,
wait, we have. There's another function here of the questions that come in on a separate, I don't know, on a separate channel.
So cool.
Can we, I mean, because I'm happy to just take a couple minutes here, but on the Q&A, it's, let me just bring it up. I'm an art teacher in Red Rock, Ontario. Nip Rock Art is the handle. Do you have any advice for high school students who are interested in art and history as they, sorry, I'm small now, as they build plans for their care, maybe? Sorry, it's very small on my phone. But at any rate, I think advice for high school students and who are interested in art and art history going forward.
That's a great question. So advice for high school students who are interested in art and want to keep going. I mean, high school is totally where I first got interested in art, for sure. I had a fantastic high school art teacher who taught us how to do stuff like painting and drawing and ceramics, but also was teaching us a lot about art history, and was also taking us on lots of field trips to galleries. And I remember, I got to see things on those trips that probably I would not have seen otherwise. So, I think it's advice I give to lots of emerging artists is to get out there and to go see exhibitions and to go meet the people in your community and to see, to see what's on, to see what you like, that it's both about objects, but it's also about a community. So, and again, at this particular moment that we're in, I think we're spoiled for content. Like there is so much content being put online right now that I hardly even know where to start. So, you know, I think for your students, there's this really amazing opportunity for them to go, you know, if they're interested in contemporary art, there's galleries that specialize in that and museums that specialize in that, and they could follow talks. If there's artists that they're excited about, there's lots of artists right now doing online studio visits where you can really kind of dig into someone's practice. So if the question was specific to this moment, I think, yeah, there's a really neat opportunity to kind of travel the world and kind of get a sense of what's out there.
Well, often I'll do, like, especially in the evenings or whatever, the Instagram live grab bag. I just see who's actually, you know, there's been artists that have been really active. I know that, I mean, people are kind of coming and going here because I know we're going a bit over the time we had said. So I do think, though, that there's been an interesting question proposed by about whether you've seen, because you do have a background in performance art, Nicole, if you've seen anything interesting in this COVID time of how there's adjustments to performance at the moment. I think that's a question we're going to have to grapple with.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've been doing a lot of research about performance, its history at the gallery, but also sort of looking at you know, I'm broadening out into dance and performance art in institutions right now, which I think is an area that lots of spaces are thinking about. And in some ways, I think actually performance art is, you know, I know it often privileges this relationship between the live performing body and the audience. But it's also a discipline that can translate really, really well to online platforms. You know, to be able to live stream or present work on those kinds of platforms is really is something that performance art can adapt to. Well, I've been looking at live streaming programs, and I mean, a shout out to Mountain Standard Time Festival in Calgary, where I used to work. They've commissioned a series of live streamed performances that they're continuing to do. So again, this yeah, I actually see some really interesting potential, but I also kind of imagine that once this is done, we'll be really, really excited to like cram into a gallery together and all like sit around a person doing a thing. Like I think there's an energy there that is still hard to capture. I don't know, Jonathan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Nicole, no, actually, I was just about to say I think that's a wonderful place to end. Let's hope that that's what we all get back to. And that we get there, you know, when we get there, and I'm sure we will in due time, and we'll see what comes. But we'll be having amazing discussions along the way, and I wanted to just thank everybody who tuned in, and also thank you to, I think Nicole and I will thank our curatorial colleagues and Kitty Scott as well for just getting this up and running, along with all of the help of our communications department and education.
And you know, Adam Welch as well, who helped us kind of put together and conceive the idea for this series too. Yeah.
So thanks everyone for tuning in, and I believe these will be online again as we are recording them. And I think for some of the questions that we haven't had a chance to get to, I should also say that I would recommend emailing questions to the Facebook or Instagram generally, and then those will be directed to us, and I'll speak to our social media coordinators so that those can be answered, because I saw some about Ai Weiwei and others where we can answer those on separate channels. So thanks everyone. Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks everyone. Thanks.
See you later. Bye. Bye.